Oh, okay.
Okay, everybody, welcome. I'm Paul Cavine. I'm the Adult Services Specialist here at the library, and we're happy to have Ranger Kane West from the Hot Springs National Park back for the second in the Park Chat series. And there may be a smaller crowd in person, but last time we had the live stream and recording broadcast, and it ended up with close to 1,000 views. I don't remember what the final total was, but it was really incredible. So the word got out there, so I'm glad people are really interested in hearing about our national park here. So this is recorded on the library's YouTube channel, so you can go to YouTube, search Garland County Library. If you want to share this with anyone, it's also available on Facebook for a limited time as well. So this ongoing series is going to happen every other month. It's bi-monthly. There's two definitions of bi-monthly. It's not twice a month, it's every other month. And so the next one will be in August and October and December and so on. We'll continue as long as there is interest in person and online, and Kane has a huge never-ending list of topics that connect with our wonderful national park here. So I'm gonna stop stalling and turn things over to our esteemed park ranger. So everyone please give a warm welcome to Ranger Kane West.
Thank you all very much. It was actually really exciting when Paul gave us the numbers at the end of the live stream last time, because 20-ish people is fairly normal for live 12 o'clock noon time presentations, but this town probably has as much interest in its national park as any town in the country, and that was just reflected once more by the hundreds of people who watched online. So we are here because y'all are curious about the place in which you live. Now, last time we spoke about the history of Hot Springs, really showing how community members in Hot Springs for over 2 centuries have created this place. It exists because the local community pushed for conservation. And that's the national park story writ large. And here in Hot Springs, y'all come from a long line of, I want to have a park type people. So well done there. And this week, we're going to shift from the history side, or what the park is, to what all of this is about, which is the hot springs water. Right? So the goal of today is sort of to introduce and to clarify the process of the water, some of the fun facts about the water, and introduce some of the latest science that we know of about where the water begins. And so by the end of this presentation, I definitely want you to see my awesome graphic about dragons, and I definitely want you to know the term hot springs recharge zone, because the hot springs recharge zone is sort of the pulse, the lifeblood, or the source of the town that we know, the park that we know, the community that's here. So that's a term that not whenever I say, hey, have you ever heard of the hot springs recharge zone? That's not something that's on their mind. But if we can bring an awareness that we have the possibility of protecting that space that we'll talk about towards the end of the program, then we as a community will have sort of a focus on where to put a lot of our conservation efforts to maintain the water that we all hold dear. Now, the Hot Springs water story is full of science, and it's also full of myth, right? Every single person in this town might have an idea about where the water comes from, about what makes it special. And so sometimes it's hard to parse out between science and myth. And so we'll try to do that a little bit today. But it's also this water source that has drawn millions of people throughout time to Hot Springs. Now, this is the second presentation in this series. We'll keep on going, but this will be my last time to present for quite a while. So hopefully I sound enthusiastic. And as we get going, I want to make sure we thank the Garland County Library, right? So Paul told our story, our meet cute story from previous, where we both wanted to have a place where the Park Service could tell the park stories to the general public. And also the Friends of Hot Springs. The Friends of Hot Springs National Park is our sort of outreach arm. They're a nonprofit that helps support the park through various efforts. And so they're a generous supporter of the Park Chats series. And if we're able to bring in various speakers, it'll be with the help of the Friends of Hot Springs National Park. So always a wonderful ally to have in the long-term goals and efforts of Hot Springs National Park. And the next time we're here, we are scheduled to have the park superintendent, Laura Miller, speaking with us. We're sort of a presentation and then Q&A. And so again, our goal is to be able to talk to people of this place about the park that they all hold dear. So very excited to have her aboard in August. So it's always the fourth Wednesday of every month. So I'll move on. Now, much of the story of the hot springs water in substance is a hidden story. And you don't have to understand it to have the water come out. But as we move forward with new generations, with more people moving into the area, the need to understand the science of hot springs becomes greater and greater, because the more we understand about the process, helps us in our management goals, in our management focuses, and it helps us build strategies and priorities for the generations to come. Now, on the right is where people think about hot springs, right? You think about where the water comes out of the ground, you touch it, you take your family over there, they touch it, they go, ouch. And you say, yes, it's hot. And they say, how hot is it? And you say, well, it's Hot Springs National Park. And so you have built-in dad jokes just from the heat of the water. But what we don't often think about is the recharge zone, the mountains around us, and how they contribute to the whole overall working of hot springs. And so what we're going to try to do is fill in this gap between where the water emerges and the source of everything. Now, we are here because the water is here. The park is here because the water is here. The city is here because the park is here. This is why Hot Springs is on the map. And so we have proof of that. We have people who come to the hot springs, people drink it, they bathe in it, they sit by the fountains, they touch the water, right? If we had gone back 400 years, they might have different clothing, but they were doing the same thing. They were drinking it, they were bathing in it, they were touching it. But also, much of the marketing around this place is connected to the springs. It inundates everything that we think about, from the town's logo to places that call themselves springs, to people that have springs in the name, to spa references, right? So the hot springs and that concept is imbued in so much of the marketing around this place that we almost forget about. We take it for granted that the water is not only what feeds us, but also what gives us our visual appeal. Now, I want to ask you all, when you think about hot springs water, what are some of the things that surprise you about this place? What do you first notice when you come up to it? And people online can't answer because I can't hear them, so it'll have to be from the live audience.
Steamy.
It's steamy, which tells us that it's hot. Right? It's unusually hot, 143 degrees. That puts us in basically the top third of hottest springs in the United States. It's about 1,600 springs around the United States, and we are among the most thermalized, the hottest. Also, the location. People are like, why are there hot springs in Arkansas? And that is a very good question. Most of the springs, as you can see on this map, are far out west. They're in the New Mountains. They're in places like the Rio Grande Rift Valley. They are along the coast, the Ring of Fire. Right? Most of the springs are out west. That's why people can just do whole hot springs tours in Colorado and Utah and Wyoming. It is very unusual to have hot springs east of the Rocky Mountains. The mountains are older. We don't have latent volcanism under the ground heating things up. And in fact, there's no hot spring of our temperature east of us. The next hottest springs are like less than 110 degrees. They're the ones that are over in Virginia. You'd have to travel 900 miles west of us to New Mexico to find the next closest springs hotter than us. It is pretty crazy to be here. And that has all sorts of really exciting impacts on our thermophile communities, but it means that you can go to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and not expect to find these thermal springs. Also, has anybody been to Yellowstone? Please note for the live audience that 2 people raised their hand. All right, 3 people have now raised their hand. If you go to Yellowstone, it's amazing, it's beautiful, it has the most geysers, half the geysers on Earth exist in Yellowstone. But it also has a smell. What does it smell like in Yellowstone?
Sulfur.
It smells like sulfur. He is like angry. You're angry about that sulfur smell, right? It smells like rotten eggs. People today, they come up to hospitals, they're almost disappointed that we don't have a nasty smell to our water. So unfortunately, it smells incredible and it tastes delicious. Speaking, and that's because mostly we only have trace sulfides in the water. And then speaking of taste, anybody who drinks the hot springs water? Do you drink it chilled? I love to drink it chilled. Do you drink it straight hot?
Room temperature.
Room temperature. Well, I'm not saying it's delicious, but I'm saying it's delicious. It just tastes good, right? We show this photo all the time, on the one on the left, but we have historic photos of people coming to the fountains here in Hot Springs that date over a century. This is the Noble Fountain, and people were just gathering with their cups, right? It tastes good. So there are unusual things from where it is to how hot it is to how it tastes to how it smells that sort of literally build the sensory awareness of the springs. And that has drawn scientific expeditions for a while now. I'm going to have a slide full of words. This is the only slide full of words, but I expect you all to read every single, you don't have to do it. So we have 2 centuries of scientific exploration, and it really begins with the Hunter and Dunbar expedition. They show up sort of at the same time that Lewis and Clark are going out west. They have somewhat of the same goals in general as Lewis and Clark. They want to know what the resources are in that part of the Louisiana Purchase and who lives there. And the specific interest in the hot springs water had to do with its temperature, its supposed healing quality. Once they got here, they were confused about the green matter, the thermophiles. And we'll talk a little bit more about the heat source in a bit. But we have these quotes that tell us that they were asking 221 years ago basically the same questions that visitors today ask about the park. Like, can I drink it? On our arrival, we immediately tasted the hot springs water, and I did not discover any other taste except that of very good water. So I'm not saying that hot springs is delicious. One of the first exploratory scientists of the United States over 200 years ago said it's delicious. And then there's that question of, is it healing? Is there something about the water? And you'll see a little debate. Some of our people pretended to have discovered cathartic properties, but I have been unable to detect the existence of any such qualities in the water. So is it healing? Is it not? Who's to say, right? That's the debate that's happening there. But it's already the curiosity of, is this water healing in any way? I'm always curious about this. There are 4 principal springs. People wonder today if we have a same sense of the mountainside with all the springs. Our number of open air springs today is basically the same as those 4 principal springs, but we know the temperature of them. It appears that the highest temperature is about 148 to 150 degrees. Today, our hottest springs is about 147. The average is 143. And so we know from over 200 years of science that the temperature is fairly consistent. That's pretty amazing. And there's also the green thermophiles. Under the hottest water, we observed a lively green appearance. However, no vegetable is hitherto known to exist in temperature of 150 degrees. Right? So we have thermophiles that are literally the beginning of thermophilic science in the United States. First sort of like identified and picked off the leaves here in Hot Springs. Challenging understandings of how nature could operate. And then that last question of what is the cause of the heat? He says, I leave it to scientific men to decide the cause for the heat. No volcanic appearance is to be found at any part of the hills or mountains of the Washita. And so it's hot, but I don't see a volcano. They're asking the same questions then that we get today. Is it hot because of a volcano? Can I drink the water? Why are all these people filling up jugs of water as I'm driving up? Same questions. And so from that science, I really want to get into first the heat source, what we think. Now, there are some theories, maybe that there's a volcano underneath us. By the late 1870s, there were legends written about the water, specifically that there was a dragon Magmathon being his name. Unfortunately, does anybody see a theory on here that they definitely think is not true? All right, we have some very open-minded people to consider these. In fact, neither of these are the case. We don't have a volcano underneath us. There is no dragon. Instead, what we know at this point is that the hot springs are heated by the latent heat of the earth, the internal heat of the earth that is sort of expanding out from the core to the crust. And just to get a little bit of science, we're going to lean into what that means. There's something called the geothermal gradient. Now, the geothermal gradient, it basically just says that the deeper you go, the hotter it gets. Right? Just if you go down deep into the center of the earth, you'll bake a little bit faster. So this internal heat of the earth is the heat source. Now, that still leaves a few questions to our minds. And just to give you this heat map, on the top, this is a heat map of the United States. It shows us that the heat of the ground, the rate of heat increase, is different in different places. The rocks might cause that. Closer volcanic material to the surface might cause that. Something in the water might cause that. There's inconsistencies. And then some science nerd put a graph on the bottom that y'all can definitely not see that shows that there's a normal geothermal gradient. There's a mid-oceanic ridge where just plumes of lava are coming to the surface. That's basically Hawaii, and Hawaii is going off right now because it's a mid-ocean ridge. And if you want to see the coolest thing on USGS, go look at their live feeds of the Kilauea explosion. It's amazing eruptions. Then we have hotspots, sort of more like a Yellowstone. And then we have subduction. This usually happens on the coast. There are different things that might impact the geothermal gradient, how hot it gets at depth. Hot springs is in the normal geothermal gradient. We're above, there is like a slightly higher gradient just south of us. This is where you have a lot of the bromides and the oil fields of Louisiana and Arkansas. We are not in it. We are really boring. We have a very boring geothermal gradient, which is either really disappointing or really fascinating, because that leaves the question of, well, if it's just a normal geothermal gradient, how do we have this water? But in general, that means about 60 to 90 feet in depth will increase the temperature by about 1 degree. So there's a range here in hot springs. But our geothermal gradient basically goes down, and we'll probably hit no more than 150 degrees as the water seeps down through the ground at about 7,500 feet. Now, water gets hot at depth all over the place. That's just what happens in a deep-seated aquifer. Water at 6,500 feet in West Texas, similar temperature. The question is about how it gets back up to the surface. That's what sort of is unique about hot springs. So we have a normal geothermal gradient. The water goes down super deep, it gets hot, but it is able to come back to the surface because we have really deep-seated fault lines. So the fault lines that are the result of the formation of the Ouachita Mountains just go so far down, and they're like a chimney that brings that hot water back up to the surface. We have a graphic that is my favorite graphic, even if it's hard to read. So water is landed, it's gone down super deep, hits the fault line, comes back up to the surface. And it is really unusual for this to happen. The fault line, the springs out east have a somewhat similar story, but like at Yellowstone, to give you a point of reference, the water in Old Faithful doesn't go down 7,500 feet like ours does. It goes down about 260 feet. And at 72 feet, the water in Old Faithful is 244 degrees. So they have a giant heater underneath the rocks that makes any water close to the surface also be potentially heated up. Our water does not have a heat source that close to the surface. It just has to go down. It's like scooping to the very bottom of the ice cream barrel. you got to work for that. We're not talking about the little scoops off the top, right? Our water travels between 4,400 and 7,500 feet down to get as hot as it does before it travels back up. And so again, the source of the water is the source of the heat is just the heat of the earth. So our water travels down super, super, super far, and then it hits that long fault line to come back up. And that is so unusual. And very few places east of us have that same dynamic at this point for various geological reasons. So we should feel really lucky to have hot springs, and especially hot springs this hot, because everything has to be working right. I'm going to show you how it works. We basically have a giant underground water slide. Can I get somebody who has been to Vegas recently? You don't have to have been to Vegas, but I need somebody to make it rain. Well, it's a Kobe fan. Kobe. All right, I do need somebody to help out. All right, so we're going to visualize how the hot springs water travels down, gets hot, and comes back out. So we'll learn more about the recharge zone later. The recharge zone is basically a giant funnel, and you'll see that on the slide in a little bit. This is where the rain water begins. Water's going to travel down through cracks in the rocks, and it's going to get hot. But we are going to see if it's possible for water that's gone down to fight against gravity and come back up to the surface. Do you think it's possible? Who is skeptical? Who's on the fence that it's not going to work? Who is definitely convinced that this is going to work? I'm actually not, because I'm not used a pool noodle to demonstrate this. Usually I have a hard plastic, so we will see if indeed it works. So you're going to be the rainfall. If anybody's been here this spring, you know we've had a lot of rainfall. You're going to come over on this side. And and we also have flowers on here because, right, you're watering the flowers, and then it goes through the flowers. So we're going to rain into the recharge zone. Water's going to go down. Water's going to get hot down here, and then it's somehow going to hit one of those deep-seated fault lines that we'll talk about, and it's going to come back up to the surface. If you've ever been to a football game, yes, there are contraptions that look similar to this. It is not what we're doing today. All right, let's see if it works. Okay, yeah, hopefully it works. If it comes in, it's working! It's springing! I always tell the kids, if it comes out. Did y'all see that? That was incredible. Yay, thank you, thank you, thank you. You made it rain. And your rain turned into springs. So, giant underground water funnel, cracks in the rock that take it super far down, hits a fault line, and the water from today helps push out the water from 4,400 years ago. This process takes over 4,000 years. So when we touch this water, we are touching an environment that it's our best chance to touch a world that we no longer have access to from 4,400 years ago in our hometown or our adopted town. It's an ancient water, and its process underground is as profound and exciting as what I just felt when this pool noodle actually worked. So the next time you're at a pool and you want to show people the thermal water recharge process, y'all know how it works. All right. This is the demonstration that we do. There are great plaques that show that same thermal system. This is actually the most official image that we have of the recharge process for the hot water. Is that it goes into these very realistic Toy Story clouds, and then hyper scientifically accurate water droplets stream down through the rocks. At some point, there is a jacuzzi 45 to 7,500 feet below us. It does get hot down there, and then it comes back up. I'm going to give you another very scientific exploration of that water process. We're going to get rain clouds. That rain is going to filter down through the rocks. It's going to filter into the cracks in between the rocks. They're going to go down. They're going to go down further. It's going to heat up That heated water is then going to move towards that fault line. It's going to zoom back up to the surface, and you're going to go touch the water coming out of the hot water cascade or the display spring. Right. So again, a highly scientific rendition of our thermal water system. In reality, just for another visual, the water is going to rain into our surrounding rock layers. We'll talk about those in a bit. We have this giant water column that pushes down, creates a lot of static or hydrostatic pressure. It gets up to 150 degrees, and then it's going to travel up that fault line to the hot springs. Questions so far about the hot water process, that giant underground water slide? I'm going to do a little bit of background geology on how we built that. A few hundred million years ago, we have the giant collision of continents. This is Pangea. I also like to equate it to the Hulk when he smashes with his large fists. That collision created a series of events. We have compression, so folding. So the Ouachita Mountains are like a giant accordion. So they folded, and then at some point they pushed together so much that they faulted. And then, like all things over the age of 18, they eroded. And so you can see that the mountains in Hot Springs used to be several thousand feet higher. Over the last few hundred million years, they've eroded. And so what that's left us with after all that time is a water system with exposed lower rocks that create a lot of that catchment basin. So again, the water goes into that eroded space, travels down, gets hot, and travels back out. So this is an amazing, incredible water story that sometimes seems simple, but it doesn't exist in many other places, especially not around us. And so it is extremely unusual. And it comes out in our own backyard. And we're in this emerging place, and we are learning a lot, and we have been studying it, and so we know some things. We know really specific temperature readings. This is actually from 1901. People came by, they tested every spring. They got its temperature, they got its flow rate. So we could actually go to almost every spring in the park and do a 100+ year comparison of the temperature. We know that the water is 4,400 years old. Again, the age of the pyramids. It's a direct contact with a world and an environment that we otherwise have very little access to. We know that through tritium and carbon-14 dating. Basically, when the rain falls, it sort of captures a little bit of carbon in the soil, and that's like it's just a little time capsule that we measure when the water comes out. We also are actively monitoring. There's active science in Hot Springs National Park, and we have scientists who come in and they will test most of the springs regularly, and some of the springs as frequently as once a week. So we are getting active, up-to-date data that lets us know what's happening. They're mostly studying about 4 or 5 things. We study the temperature, right? That's what people are saying ouch about. We also study mineralization in general in the water. We study the pH, right? So if you have basically 1 to 14, where do we want to be on that scale? We study the dissolved oxygen, sort of its ability to sort of host life, and then nitrates, that's sort of like organics that might otherwise get in the water. And we know from a lot of these studies that we have a variety of minerals. We actually don't have that much mineralization in the Hot Springs water. If we had more, it would be really cloudy. But our mineralization is actually fairly moderate for a hot spring. Yes, sir?
I'm surprised I'm not seeing your thermal files listed here.
Yeah, we in the park aren't actively monitoring the thermophiles on a regular basis. In that same extent, we often rely on either interns or outside researchers to come in and study the thermophiles. So we have, we are looking at the minerals because it gives us a baseline, but the thermophile research here in Hot Springs shows us that because of certain components of the water, its isolation, the fact that we don't have a volcano, the fact that we have capping of springs, those those different conditions lead to the fact that in the 2018 study, something like 30% of the bacterium that was like identified in the water was otherwise unknown to science. And there are several, in the last 15 years, research studies that will identify or isolate a thermophile in the hot springs water, and it'll write new genus and species. So we have thermophiles that we've already confirmed have never been found anywhere else, and we have, like, in some cases, up to 30% of our thermophile mass that has not yet been identified by science. But we don't measure that regularly because it's just a harder thing to isolate than just doing regular TDS and pH and temperature monitoring. Because what we're really looking for in these tests is to see if there's any fluctuations or changes in, like, the markers of the springs, to see if anything's happening. So if we study these things in general, we know the water is going to meet health standards. And we also have the Public Health Service office that has a representative here in Hot Springs that makes sure that the water is drinkable. And so nerd alert, people are using those things that we're studying, and they tell us conditions in the water. And then for anybody who really likes large data sheets to be put onto presentations, we can do averages and we can see changes over time. And this is just a collection of a few springs. We've capped over about 33 of the 40 some odd springs, and we do our regular temperature changes, and we can see that different springs are going to have different temperatures. They're going to have slightly varying pH levels and dissolved oxygen levels. But in general, at least from this set, our pH is about 7.3. It's basically neutral. It's about the same as your blood. The average temperature over 132 is going to cook the nasties, right? So pathogens aren't going to be able to survive if the water stays over that 130-degree mark. So you're basically looking at a scientific assessment that talks about the health and cleanliness of the water, which is pretty cool. We know some things, and we're also learning some things. And here's a picture from our April flood event. The display spring, if you've ever seen it, it was no longer display spring, it was display waterfall. Water was rushing off the hillside. And I put my hand in the display spring, and the water was cold. There was so much water that it had just, like, infiltrated the springs. And so we're learning about the impacts of rain events, or that the springs aren't always consistent in their temperature. And in fact, you can overlap rainfall and temperature changes with some of the springs. So on the left is a picture of precipitation in hot springs, and on the right is one of the springs that's actively monitored by the USGS. And it's showing you that throughout the course of the year, and on the right-hand side is the year, throughout the course of the year, the temperature does change in some springs. They're impacted by water flow, by recent rainfall as much as thermal spring rainfall. And so not all the springs will have the same graph. Some of the springs will have no reaction to rainwater. Some of them will have big reactions to rainwater, seasonal fluctuations. So right now, it's about to be hot and dry. So if you went and touched the water, do you think it's going to be some of the hottest it normally is, or the coldest it normally is? It's super hot. I touched it today. Yikes. It was very hot at the display spring. The little pool was about 128 degrees. And there's usually about a 2-week lag time in that rainfall. What we're also learning about is the recharge zone. The recharge zone is the source of the water. It's the source. It's this very scientific funnel system. And it is the thing that we should all know about, because as we learn more about the recharge zone, we realize that it's going to take all of us to help keep it intact. Now, I called it a giant underground funnel. I've also seen it as described as a giant bucket. Last night, I was thinking that maybe it looks like a folded burrito. And so take your pick for how you want to describe the shape of the recharge zone. But the recharge zone extends, right? It's the funnel that collects all the water, that goes down, gets hot, comes back up. And it is not solely located in Hot Springs National Park. We are actively learning new things about the size and elevation of the recharge zone. 100 years ago, the recharge zone was thought to be contained basically within Whittington and Park Ave. It's just inside the park. By about a decade ago, the thought was that it was extending a little bit outside the park, that it was about 12 to 15 square miles. And then last check, when I talked to our geologist about a year ago, thought to be somewhere around 22 square miles. It's not that the recharge zone has grown, it's that now we are studying it. Because oftentimes Hot Springs is a history-focused park, it is a bathhouse-focused park, and the science is trying to catch up. And as we catch up, we realize that we are connected far outside of where we might imagine the boundaries of Hot Springs National Park to be. So the red on this map is the Hot Springs National Park boundary. The original recharge zone was thought to be right in here, and Indian Mountain. Then, about a decade ago, we sort of extended our recharge zone map over to this area. And then, again, this is as of about 2-3 years ago, extending all the way out. And if you were to look closely at this map, the 7 and 5 roundabout is right here. So when you drive from the Fordyce Bathhouse, you will be in the Hot Springs recharge zone almost consistently, or in its vicinity, until you reach that roundabout. And if you were to go north on that roundabout, you're still going to be passing through areas of the recharge zone. And if you are to travel south from the roundabout, you will be crossing the recharge zone in a few places until you get to Cutter Morningstar. It's huge. We used to think that the entire recharge zone was inside the park. And then we thought that most of the recharge zone was inside the park. And today we know that most of the recharge zone is outside of Hot Springs National Park. It is in our community. It is in our backyards. And that gives us new things to consider. The elevation has also changed. Now, when I was reading a report recently, it put the thought where the recharge zone was located at elevations over 1,100 feet, but it's elevations over 660 feet. And what that means is for the funnel to work, it needs to be located over 660 feet to have the hydrostatic pressure. If it's under 660 feet, it won't have the hydrostatic pressure to push the water back up, because the water is trying to balance itself. It's just trying to balance. And so it's going to go from, it's just trying to go and rebalance itself and come out of the water. So if there are that's why we need that 660 feet to help produce the hydrostatic pressure. So you were standing over 660 feet. You were very tall just now. That's what I'm really saying. And that recharge zone is all connected. This is from one of the reports. The fractures from the mountain building event create a hydraulic connectivity, effectively forming a single superficial aquifer across the region. That means that rocks over where it has, over on the east of Indian Mountain, in some sense are being impacted by a water flow, several hundred yards away. It's all connected. It's like almost like a hot springs aquifer system that is up in the mountains. And so impacts could be felt. The pressure system could be felt in different places. Again, 660 feet necessary. This is one of this was found by the USGS just in the last few years, that we need to have that level. We need to be able to maintain that system. Again, to push the water down, to get it heated, and to bring it back up. So, what we know is that the recharge zone is the lifeblood of hot springs. It is and the hot springs water is the single most durable resource for this community. It has lasted longer than any business. It has been here before us, and hopefully if we keep on letting nature, it will continue on after us. It'll be our gift to future generations that they too can come to hot springs and drink the hot springs water. And so the town is here, the park is here, the people are here. The people come to hot springs because of the water. And it's the source of the elevation that we need. It's the source of the filtration. It's what captures the annual rainfall. The rocks in it are what give the mineral content of the hot springs water. It's also the landscape and the beauty that brings people to hot springs. It's the hiking and the trails that give a quality of life in this place. It's so amazing. So the water is born in the mountains around us. And so now that we know more, it's the park, I feel like it's my responsibility to tell people that the recharge zone exists. Because if I say, hey, where do you think this water comes from? Have you ever heard of the recharge zone? They say, are you crazy? I'm just trying to fill up my water, and you're asking me crazy questions. Because people love the water, but I haven't told them enough yet about where the water comes from. So I feel like it's my job. And we have an opportunity as a community. We have a responsibility to protect it, but we have an opportunity to highlight that this community for the last 10,000 years has been protecting this water source. We've kept it intact. This entire water system is intact. We've tried to keep it protected. And that's at a time when not all communities have access to this clean of water, but this is an ancient water system. And if we understand it more, then we can continue to protect these mountains, these forests, these rocks. And then when somebody says, hey, where does the water come from? I want everybody in Hot Springs to be able to say, it's from the recharge zone. Let me tell you about it. Do you have a pool floating? And I'll tell you what's going on. So, this is one of the most visited destinations in the state of Arkansas, perhaps the most visited. The water also nourishes us as a community. We have a national park here to protect, at least where the water emerges. But as a community, we have a responsibility to figure out how do we want to protect where the water begins. So thank you all very much for coming to Hot Springs. Thank you for learning that there's this hidden story that we get to protect for generations to come. And I will leave any questions to you all. What would you like to learn next about how the water flows through our community? Yes, what you got?
Controversial. I don't know how much you can comment on it, but I've heard that when they built that new bypass to the village, that it kind of disrupted the recharge zone a bit. Is that true? And what happened?
Sure. So, not a scientist. I don't work with USGS. I know that there are partnerships to understand the water system, right? So anytime that there's some sort of corridor, then there's just research around it. So we've had reason to learn more about the extension of the recharge zone. So part of that question around the bypass also helped us do a lot more of our research to know a lot more, right? So when we know more, we can do different things. We did have, this is from that paper, the potentiometric study of hot springs. They just have a map that shows where this is from when it was a proposed drive. And so the drive kind of goes through an area that does have elevations of rock that are in the recharge zone. So the most important rock that we have is the Big Fort Church and the Arkansas Novaculite as catchment basins that allow the water to filter down. And at least in some areas of the bypass move in those same areas. So we're still trying to figure out more. And so that's a collaboration that's had really interesting papers come out of it. You can be in the recharge area and sort of see how things flow through. But there's also, the things that we need to do to live in this area, in our community, could have impacts on the surface or on the forest levels. We have, urban development literally at the edge of our recharge zone. We have to think about strategically about our transportation networks that connect us to the place, and also like to do that in a way that's sustainable. And so, there's a lot of good work and collaboration on that front part. I do have this old map that shows that we used to think that was the recharge zone. But this is the study that was from my recent geologist, and he said, too early to tell, we're still working on it.
I didn't expect you to have graphics to go along with that.
Yes.
Pretty cool.
I have like another 50, but you didn't see this.
There's an online question that pretty much you kind of covered there from Catherine. She says, how do we protect the recharge zone if it's outside the park?
Right. I think it's understanding. It's understanding what the ecosystem looks like, what the hills are, what does it mean to allow water to continue to fall and filter. And so it's being good stewards of an ecosystem. And the ecosystem, it already works, right? The recharge zone already works. So it's understanding how it works and to let it keep working that way.
Didn't they used to heat downtown businesses with hot water?
Yeah, there are some businesses that have like a contract that allowed them to get the thermal water mostly for bathing, and the use of the water has like the actual management to make sure that we are maintaining the ecosystem of the creeks and meeting the flow rates for different buildings has changed over time. So those local families that were able to somehow maybe get water in their houses, we just don't have enough water to do that logistically. Yeah, it would be really convenient. And the Fordyce bathhouse is heated by the hot springs water. That's why when
That's the
an
only
AC, it's not the only one. It's the only one that I'm like more familiar with. And I have my best joke about it, which was when the AC goes out, the hot water is still working, so it gets really hot in there.
Is the water treated before it gets to the fountains?
You are drinking unfiltered water in its natural state that has been identified because of that whole natural process as being safe to drink.
How does some of the fountains have the cold water and the others are all
That's a
hot?
great question, because the thermal field where our water comes out is tiny. It's like 1,500 or 1,400 feet long by maybe 400 feet high. It's just a big old rectangle at the bottom of Hot Springs Mountain. Something in the rocks changes and flips, or a new dip-de-doo in the rock structure, and so Whittington Spring and Happy Hollow are different water systems. Isn't that wild?
It is.
So you have this incredible water process that is just right there. The Whittington Spring, so we like to brag that the Hot Springs water is found to be 4,400 years old. The Whittington Spring water is something like 2,000 years older. If this mic were disconnected, I would drop the mic right now. It'd be a mic drop moment. It's ancient. And the Happy Hollow Spring is order of decades old. Yeah, so 3 different spring systems. It's really special to be able to drink water, and to drink untreated natural water that's identified as safe is pretty unusual. There's a lot of communities that will provide water, and it tastes good. I've drank some of those other spring waters that won't go back to drink that water. Yeah.
We traveled to another area in the west that had another hot springs.
Mhm.
Was Montana? Remember the hot springs we went through in the west?
So yeah, lots of hot springs out west, 1,600. And I do want to clarify, the hot springs water is not treated. The cold springs are treated. They're up to municipal treatment standards. We have really wonderful water operators who maintain our entire water system. And so when people call and say, hey, how's the water today? I say, well, let me ask our water operator who is providing for hundreds of people.
Well, also people think, if I take it home out of the hot water fountain, can I just leave it sit in a cupboard, or should I be refrigerating it?
That is a question for the Public Health Service. I'm not the person to answer that question.
Why does the hot springs taste better than the cold ones? In my opinion.
In your opinion, the mineral content is actually pretty similar. There's just a little bit more silica in the hot water than Happy Hollow, but in general, the water content is or the mineral content is mostly the same in terms of the ratio of magnesium and calcium carbonate and such. So I don't know why,
Placebo.
but I also agree. So don't tell the people at Happy Hollow that I just said that on Facebook Live.
Something I just thought about might be interesting is I know that people are afraid of microplastics, which we should be. I feel like since that water down there is so old and under the ground so much, like there's probably not really any of those in there, like there are in the treated water that we have up here. I know that you probably can't speak to that, but it's just something I thought.
I know that there were, I'm pretty sure that question has been asked about like the presence of, any environmental contaminants in the water. And I have not heard any alerts, so there you go. But yeah, so it's an ancient water source. There is some recent cold water, or like rainwater, that does also influence the springs. Yes, ma'am.
Well, you know that lithium is in you talk about the hot springs water in Montana. Some of that contains lithium, that's why people thought it made them feel better.
Yeah, and so different mineral contents. I don't know if anybody has seen Frozen 2. I got only head shakes. So if you had seen Frozen 2, Olaf says that water has memory, and I like that idea that water has memory because it tells us its age, its depth, the mineral contents. The mineral contents tell us the rocks that it goes through, and we just don't have. We don't have any lithium that I know of in our water, so we got to go to Montana for the lithium rocks in Montana. Is the secret. It's like drinking Tums. It's sort of like it's probably like an exaggeration to say it's drinking Tums, but we have calcium in the water.
Got another online question. Catherine again asked, would it be accurate to say that the process of the water rising is basically convection, or is there underground pressure impacting the rise?
Since I don't know my thermodynamics well enough to say yes or no, I'll table that question. But you have hydrostatic pressure that's pushing the water through, and then you also have the expansion because it's hotter, it does expand. And so both of those are going to push the water back up to the surface. And I don't know the extent to which convection plays a part in that specific process or just in the source of heat process. I know it plays a part in the source of heat geothermal gradient question, but I wouldn't say yes or no because I'm a history doctor and not a rock doctor.
I've got a silly question.
Sure.
How often do people try to bathe in the display springs?
I don't know. The hot water it's appealing. People, like I said in our previous presentation, people use the steam for a lot. I put my hand in it, and the people learn pretty quick to not bathe after they put their hand in. Because I usually see people go, youch! And that's not usually how I want to enter my bathing water. Any other questions? Any other pictures you want me to go back to? What are you going to tell your friends about when you go home? What's the source of the hot springs water? The recharge zone. Yes, it's in the mountains around us, and that water comes out after 4,400 years. But the water that rained yesterday helped do that last little bit. We're in a 9,000-year epoch in the history of the world, all the time. And all we have to do is let it keep on working the way it's supposed to work, and let those mountains keep on mountaining the way that they're supposed to work. And then we will be providing the most durable resource for this community for generations to come. Right? This is our promise to the next generations, that the thing that has drawn us, that people literally moved to this place for the water, that our promise is that future generations will be able to move here. We don't even have to do anything crazy special. We just have to let it keep on working the way it works. A profound act with simple steps.
All that steam on all those mountains,
This is water vapor, but it looks really cool. This is like when you go to the Buffalo and there's like I wish. But yeah, there's no hot springs 5 miles east of Hot Springs. There's no hot springs 10 miles west. It's just right there, right behind the bathhouses. It's pretty crazy. 47 some odd springs.
Are there studies happening right now about like how climate change is affecting the recharge zone, or if it affects it since it's so far in here?
Yeah, so what we see with rainfall events, we need rain to fall a certain way. If you had, sometimes, I didn't do it because we were on carpet, but sometimes I'll say, all right, pour faster. And the tube will not be able to hold all that water, and it just comes off as surface water. And so if we see larger rain events that drop more water, then that doesn't filter down, it just goes down the street, right? When you see waters flooding down, they're not going into the ground to recharge. And so we can see that that's one of the potential impacts on the water sources, just larger rain events. So you want a nice, moderate rain. When I go outside, I always judge the rain for how well it's gonna help to refill the hot springs recharge zone. A little sprinkle, that's good for my plants. A nice, solid, moderate rainfall is perfect because it waters my plants and I don't have to remember to, and it refills the recharge zone. Major rain events are going to just send cars down Central Avenue. But not, actually not because we have a good infrastructure system to go hot springs. Thank you all for listening to our historian talk geology.
So the next program is August 27th, and it's going to cover what?
It is going to be a superintendent's grab bag for what she would like to speak about. But it's a really cool opportunity to work, to be able to present alongside our superintendent, Laura Miller, and so be able to give park updates the way that she wants to give them. And so come join us. Once I was able to get her assent that she would be here, I was very excited. And so come out and see us in a couple of months to talk with the superintendent of the park. And the location will be here. Okay. And online.
What was the date again?
August 27th. It's the last Wednesday of the month in August. All right. Well, thank you again,
Thank you
Ranger
all so
West.
much.